an introduction to a story you'll definitely want to hear to the end. What would you do if you found out your husband was cheating on you in your own bed? Would you make a scene? File for divorce? And what if, to top it all off, his mistress brazenly puts on your favorite terry cloth bathrobe after her shower? Chapter 1. The Aperture with the Bathrobe. Betrayal, my dear, enters the home like quiet, barely noticeable dust that settles on the polished surface of your marital happiness. At first, you don't notice it. You brush it away with a casual smile, a meaningless kiss. But the dust accumulates, layer by layer, until one day, in the merciless glare of the midday sun, you see that the shine is gone, and beneath a gray veil of neglect lies a completely different, alien life of your husband. For me, that merciless ray of sun, brutally exposing all the grime, was my snow-white, terry cloth, scandalously expensive bathrobe. Stories are born from emotion. I returned from my Aunt Elizabeth's estate a day earlier than planned. It wasn't that I was plagued by bad feelings. I am a sensible woman, not prone to mystical whims. Rather, it was the fatigue of pastoral landscapes and conversations about rheumatism that drove me back to the urban embrace of our little nest with Robert. The house greeted me with a ringing, unnatural silence, the kind that occurs not when a house is empty, but when someone has just left it, taking with them the sounds, smells, and a piece of an alien soul. The air in the bedroom was stale, with a faint hint of unfamiliar perfume, something cloyingly sweet from the arsenal of girls who strive to smell like a candy store. And then I saw it. My bathrobe. It wasn't hanging in its rightful place, on the silk hook behind the bathroom door. No, it was carelessly tossed onto the armchair by the vanity table. My heart did a somersault, worthy of a carnival acrobat. I approached closer. On the snow-white terry cloth, right by the collar, was a tiny dark spot. I leaned in, almost touching it with my nose. Chocolate? Coffee? No. It was lipstick. Cheap, vulgarly red lipstick, leaving a greasy, self-satisfied stain on my property. And next to it, caught on a thread, was a long blonde hair. I am a brunette from birth to the tips of my nails. At that moment, my world didn't collapse. It simply narrowed to the size of that vulgar smear of lipstick and that brazen blonde hair. I didn't scream, didn't break down in tears, didn't start smashing the family china. Instead, a cold, calculating anatomist awoke within me. I realized that my marriage was a corpse, and I had to dissect it to understand the cause of death. Robert, my charming, my lovable, my deceitful Robert, appeared an hour later, whistling an aria from a trendy opera and clutching a bouquet of my favorite peonies. He put on a show of boisterous joy at my unexpected return, but his eyes, those mirrors of the soul, were clouded for a split second with a hint of panic. He told me about a lonely evening spent reading business papers. He lied so artistically, so inspiredly, that I almost believed him. Almost. That night, as he slept, with his arms outstretched and a serene smile on his face, oh, what a wasted talent in this genius of pretense, I quietly got up. The fury that had at first seemed icy slowly began to melt, turning into something else, a biting, inventive thirst for revenge. But not a banal, not a vulgar one. Oh no, revenge had to be a dish served not cold, but with a tingle. I went into the bathroom, retrieved the bathrobe, that silent piece of evidence of someone else's sin, and headed to my small home laboratory, where I mixed creams and masks using my French grandmother's recipes. In an antique apothecary mortar, I mixed two components. The first was an extract of a special kind of tropical vine, which, upon contact with warm, moist skin, caused an unbearable but completely harmless itch. The effect lasted for exactly 2 days, leaving no trace except the victim's tormented nervous system. The second ingredient was a powder brought to me from India. Colorless and invisible at normal temperature, it acquired a bright, rich indigo color when heated to 97-98 degrees Fahrenheit. It was indelible, at least for a week. I prepared a thick, odorless paste and with a very fine, invisible layer, rubbed it into the inner lining of the bathrobe. The collar, cuffs, belt, all the places that fit so snugly against the body heated after a bath. I returned the bathrobe to its place on the armchair. It lay there, innocent and snow-white, like a sleeping lamb hiding the cunning of a rattlesnake within its folds. I lay in bed next to my husband. For the first time in months, I fell asleep with a smile. The smile of a director anticipating the premiere of her most unusual play, in which the main character was destined to first itch frantically and then to shine in public in the most unexpected shades of blue. It was a shame, though, that no applause was expected in the audience, only the quiet, lonely laugh of a betrayed wife. Chapter 2. The nets are set and the prey trembles. For a mouse to fall into a mousetrap, you have to offer it a piece of cheese. And for my husband's mistress to wear my poisoned bathrobe again, I had to create the illusion of complete security, a space for sin, so to speak. The very next day, over morning coffee, I announced to Robert with the utmost concern that I had received a disturbing telegram. Aunt Elizabeth, a dear old soul, had taken a turn for the worse, and it was my filial duty to be at her deathbed, which, judging by the description, could last from a week to a whole month. My husband's face at that moment was a canvas on which a great master's brush had mixed grief for his aunt and thinly veiled jubilation. He squeezed my hands, looked into my eyes with crocodile-like sadness, and begged me to set off immediately, not to worry about anything. The house, the business, and he himself, his faithful Robert, would patiently await my return. I packed a suitcase, demonstratively putting in my most boring outfits and a volume of moral essays, so that my image would match my somber mission. Robert saw me off at the train station, almost shed a tear by the train car, and waved his handkerchief until the train disappeared around the bend. Oh, how predictable he was, my dear rascal. Of course, I didn't go to any estate. Getting off at the very next station, I hired a cab and returned to the city. Not to our house, but to a tenement building across the street, where I had previously rented a small room on the top floor. Its window was directly opposite our bedroom windows. Armed with a pair of opera glasses, I transformed myself into the most patient and attentive spectator. I didn't have to wait long. Not even 2 hours after my departure, a hired carriage stopped at our entrance, and out of it fluttered her. The person was young, pretty, and possessed that specific kind of beauty that men who are tired of their wives' intelligence and dignity so appreciate. Blonde curls, pouty, petulant lips, a figure seemingly made for embraces, and a complete lack of thought in her gaze. She entered the house without knocking, as if she owned it. My binoculars, my faithful companion, allowed me to see their meeting in the hallway. Kisses, embraces, his hands wandering over her body with the greed of a starving beast. The scene was vulgar, but I must admit, captivating in its frankness. They were so sure of their solitude, so carefree in their little paradise, that I felt a pang, not of jealousy, no, but rather of disgust, the kind you feel when observing the bustling lives of insects. Subsequent events unfolded according to the predictable scenario. Champagne, fruit, laughter that carried across the street even to my ears, and then the light came on in our bedroom windows. I pressed my eye to the binoculars, my heart beating evenly and measuredly like a clock pendulum, counting down the last minutes of their tranquility. There they were, entering the room. There he was, hugging her, whispering something in her ear. There she was, giggling coquettishly and disappearing behind the bathroom door. I held my breath. This was the key moment of my entire production. The minutes stretched out like thick syrup. And then the door opened. She came out, and she was wearing it. My snow white, my innocent, my vengeful bathrobe. She coquettishly wrapped it around her chest, walked around the room, primly adjusting her hair. Roberts looked at her with adoration, and I looked at them both with the cold smirk of a creator watching two foolish Adam and Eves who had just plucked the forbidden fruit. They didn't know yet that this fruit would not only cast them out of paradise, but also cover them first with an unbearable itch and then with an indelible shame. I lowered the binoculars. The show had begun. Chapter 3. An allegro with itching and a scherzo in blue tones. The first notes of my symphony of revenge sounded quietly, almost imperceptibly. Through the binoculars, I saw the girl, carelessly tossing back the robe's lapel, sit down at the vanity and begin to preen in front of the mirror. And then she gave an almost imperceptible twitch of her shoulder. Once, again. Then her fingers, with their vulgarly red nails, reached for her neck and rubbed the tender skin behind her ear. Robert, sitting on the bed in the pose of a Roman patrician, didn't notice. He was engrossed in contemplating his prey. But then she scratched again, more vigorously this time, her doll-like forehead furrowed. I smiled. The vine extract had begun its work. It acted slowly, gradually, penetrating the skin warmed after the bath, awakening millions of tiny, invisible needles. A quarter of an hour later, what had been a slight irritation escalated into a full crescendo. The girl was no longer flirting. She was fidgeting in the armchair, scratching her back, her arms, her stomach, all the places that had come into contact with the bathrobe's fabric. Her movements became more abrupt and nervous. Robert finally broke free from his reverie and looked at her with bewilderment. "What's wrong, Lily?" he asked. I saw her snap back in irritated response, jumping up and starting to pace the room like a caged tigress. The bathrobe was thrown on the floor. But it was too late. The poison had already been absorbed. She stood in the middle of the room in her birthday suit, fiercely scratching herself with both hands, leaving red marks on her skin. The romantic evening was rapidly turning into a panicked consultation with an invisible doctor. Robert, my practical husband, immediately showed a miraculous flair for invention. He brought a pitcher of cream from the kitchen and began to smear it on his suffering paramour. Then he tried olive oil. When that didn't help, he apparently remembered some grandmother's remedy and tried to put a cabbage leaf on her back, brought for the occasion from the pantry. The scene was worthy of a Flemish master's painting of domestic life. A naked, writhing girl smeared with cream and oil, and my husband, in his underwear, futilely trying to stick a juicy cabbage leaf to her shoulder blade. Their passion evaporated, giving way to despair and bewilderment. But the main surprise was yet to come. The indigo powder was waiting for its moment. It needed not just moisture, but constant warmth and friction, and Lily, in her crazy itching dance, created the perfect conditions for it. I saw it the moment she ran to the mirror to assess the extent of the disaster on her back. On her neck, where the bathrobe collar had touched her skin, a few small but distinct spots, the color of a storm cloud, had appeared. She shrieked so piercingly that I think I heard it even through the glass in the distance. She started rubbing the spots, but they didn't disappear. On the contrary, from the friction and warmth of her hands, they only became brighter and spread across her skin like ink on blotting paper. Now blue streaks adorned her wrists, her stomach, the insides of her thighs. She resembled a failed sketch by an avant-garde artist. Robert froze with the cabbage leaf in his hand, his face expressing holy horror. His beautiful nymph was transforming before his eyes into a spotted panther, and of the most poisonous bluish-black hue. Chapter 4. Confinement in the Blue Room. The itching, having reached its peak, began to slowly subside after a day, leaving behind only a slight skin irritation and complete devastation in the souls of my little lovebirds. But while the physical suffering had passed, the aesthetic and social suffering was just beginning. Lily had turned into a living map of an unknown archipelago. Chains of blue spots like islands covered her body in the most bizarre configurations. She stood in front of the mirror for hours, weeping and pointing her finger at one spot, then another, as if trying to erase them with the power of her will. Their great passion, which just yesterday seemed capable of moving mountains, had been shattered by a simple chemical reaction. Now they were not lovers, they were accomplices. Two castaways on the uninhabited and blue island of her body. Robert paced the apartment like an animal in a cage. All his masculine swagger, all his arrogance had evaporated. He was pathetic. At first, he tried to act. He rubbed poor Lily with lemon juice until she howled in pain. Then he tried to wash her with a pumice stone, leaving scratches on her delicate skin. Finally, in complete desperation, he brought a bottle of document stain remover from his office, but the acrid smell of the remedy made them both abandon such a radical measure. Lily couldn't leave. To appear on the street in such a state would not just be a scandal, it would be a sensation, a feast for all the city gossips for a year to come. She was trapped in my apartment, in our bedroom, an unwitting prisoner of my brilliant cunning. Their relationship, stripped of its romantic veneer, revealed its ugly essence. Arguments began. She accused him of being married to a witch. He reproached her for daring to touch his wife's things. They hissed at each other like two snakes in a single jar. The food he brought her from the kitchen seemed tasteless to her. The champagne he opened to cheer her up was, according to her, sour. From my observation post, I watched this domestic drama with undisguised pleasure. I saw how my husband, who had seemed like a demigod to me just a short time ago, had turned into a clumsy, bewildered jailer. He secretly ran to the store for groceries, looking around nervously, and upon returning, was met with the new barrage of accusations from his blue Madonna. The love triangle had collapsed. In its place, a tormented duet of two losers had formed, bound by a single indelible shame. 3 days passed. I decided that Aunt Elizabeth had been sick long enough. It was time to go home. It was time to put the final stamp on this extravagant production. Chapter 5. A Healing Balm and Eternal Servitude. I entered my own apartment without a sound, turning the key in the lock so that its click was loud and clear. The hallway smelled of something sour and stagnant. Muted, irritated voices came from the bedroom. I slowly took off my hat and gloves,
placed my purse on the table, and walked into the room. The scene that greeted my eyes surpassed all expectations. In the middle of the room, in my peignoir, oh, the irony, sat a tearful girl whose face and hands were streaked with blue spots. On the bed, with his head in his hands, sat my husband, Robert, who had aged 10 years. Empty bottles, lemon peels, and a dried cabbage leaf lay on the floor. Despair hung in the air. At my appearance, they froze like characters in a bad play, caught by a suddenly raised curtain. Lily made a sound like the squeak of a trapped mouse and tried to cover herself with a shawl. Robert jumped up, his face as pale as a sheet. He opened his mouth but couldn't utter a word. He just stared at me with horror and pleading.
I surveyed them with a calm, almost lazy gaze. "Robert, darling," I said in a level, social tone, "I see you have a guest, and it seems the young lady has a bit of a skin problem. How unpleasant." I walked over to the vanity table, picked up a bottle of almond oil that I had pre-mixed with a few drops of a special solvent. "This is an old French remedy," I explained, addressing the bewildered Lily. "It works wonders for sudden pigmentation. Sometimes it happens from stress. Allow me." And taking a cotton pad, I moistened it with the oil and wiped one of the spots on her arm. The blueness disappeared as if it had never been there. At that moment, they both stared at me like savages stare at a miracle. Their faces expressed not just surprise, but a holy reverence. They understood everything. They understood that this was not an accident, not a sickness, but a well-directed play, and the director was now standing before them with a bottle of healing balm in her hands. "Robert, dear," I continued, returning the bottle to its place, "while I was looking after poor Aunt Elizabeth, I did a lot of thinking. I realized I hadn't been paying enough attention to you. You must have been bored. And you even seem to have made some foolish mistakes with the Richard stocks. Don't worry, I've taken care of everything. I've transferred our funds into safer securities while you've been busy with aesthetic experiments." Robert collapsed into a chair. He realized that I knew not only about Lily, I knew everything about his business, his mistakes, his little and big weaknesses. He was not just a caught cheater, he was an exposed, pathetic, incompetent child. Lily, realizing that the show was over and her role in it was the most humiliating, silently got up, hastily got dressed, and without saying goodbye, slipped out of the apartment like a beaten puppy. I was left alone with my husband. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't try to justify himself. He just looked up at me from below like a guilty puppy looks at its all-powerful owner. I walked over and straightened his crooked tie. "It's all right, darling," I said softly with a smile. "Everyone makes mistakes. The main thing is that everything will be fine now. I'll take care of everything." And he knew it was true. I would indeed take care of everything. Our home, our finances, his reputation, himself. Our marriage did not fall apart, oh no. It became stronger than granite. But it was no longer a union of two equals. It was my quiet, cozy, lifelong servitude for him. And the scariest thing was that he was happy about it. Because there is nothing more comfortable than a warm, well-fed, and completely unfree life under the watchful eye of a woman who, with a single bottle of oil, was able to prove that she was a goddess, and he was just a man. And sometimes a very blue man. Stories are born from emotion. If this story stirred any feelings in you, please share your thoughts.
Every comment you leave is a spark of inspiration for new stories about struggle, strength, and hope that never fades, even in the harshest reality.